Hi, okay, so I thought what I would do is rather than send you a lengthy email, I would try to draw it out and see if that helps a little bit. So let's start out with a hypothesis development. So a hypothesis is going to require three things. One, we're going to need a subject. Two, an independent, ooh, that's an awful E. An independent variable, that's what we're going to manipulate. So whether it was the drugs or the exercise or the diet. And so that can go up or down, whatever we want to do. And then the third thing we need is our dependent variable, which is really going to be the outcome of whatever it is that we're manipulating. And so the outcome can go up or down, or maybe there's a change, maybe there's not. So let's break that down into what you had initially proposed. And so the subject was really people, right? They're what get, or they suffer from the Alzheimer's. And the independent variable, so the initial proposal you had was about drugs. Three different types. And then the second idea that you had was comparing diet, exercise, and flavonoids. And what's the dependent variable? That is just whether Alzheimer's, does it go up or down? That was really here, but this is really about risk of, right? So those are the basic components, and the people side didn't change. And we could really say, okay, and this is where it becomes, this is where the scientific idea really starts to come into play. So people is really broad. Do we want to say that the way it sits right now is that drugs 1, 2, and 3 either increase or don't decrease, whatever it may be, the impact of Alzheimer's, but we haven't specified people, right? So the assumption is drugs 1, 2, and 3 make Alzheimer's go up or down to all of the people, and that's probably not really true. So as it stands, when we just say people in general, drugs and Alzheimer's, right now the null hypothesis would be something like there is no effect of drug 1, 2, 3, and you could have a different hypothesis for each of these drugs. And that's actually what should happen. There's no effect of drug 1, 2, or 3 on Alzheimer's for people. Well, at some point somebody probably tested that just to see if maybe there was an effect, but that's really broad. Ideally, what we would want is to have this even more specific, saying there is no effect of drug 1 on Hispanic males. And so that could be no 1, and then we would do another one for drug 2 and Hispanics, and we could do another one for drug 3, and the idea is that people is really broad, but there's all these subpopulations in that, right? Oops, white, black, Hispanic, and then there's male, female, there's children, there's all different kinds of things we could do there. And it sounds like the initial issue that your reviewer and Brian had was that, well, we already know those drugs are effective or are not effective. And that may be so, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to abandon that idea, because what you're really trying to bring into this whole thing is this idea of novelty. In other words, what is it that someone hasn't looked at before? So people may have said there is no effect with these 3 drugs on people. But my guess is no one has looked at a given drug, so maybe drug 1, does it affect each of these subpopulations in the same way? It very well could be that it hasn't done that. And so in terms of breaking that out into your groups, that's one way you can do that, is you could look at white, blacks, and Hispanics, and is there any kind of, I don't want to say controversy, but maybe the results aren't completely solid as the reviewer may think that they are. And you can do the same thing in terms of, we could reverse that. So instead of saying, for instance, drug 1, 2, 3, here's how it affects the white population. You could also say drug 1 white population and Hispanic, and each of you could pick a different topic and see. And then what you would do based on this, in terms of the meta-analysis, is you would each pick those results. So that may be result 1, that may be result 2, that may be result 3. So the meta-analysis then becomes a synthesis of R1, R2, R3, and whether it's the drugs. And so the idea is you're just trying to find some sort of comparison, just like you did with the chocolate and tea articles, right? That looked at a whole bunch of different articles having to do with chocolate and a whole bunch with tea, and they tried to tease out, is there any kind of relationship? So it could very well be that there is some standard that says, yep, we think drug 1 is effective with Alzheimer's. But the question then is, well, how is that really broken down? Have they actually looked at those? And so you may be able to tease out each of these subgroups in the populations, however those studies were done. Did they just do a random sample of people? Possibly. But it's also possible that there's a whole bunch of literature out there that actually looks at individual populations of those drugs, or it goes the other way around. Maybe each of these drugs, you can actually tease out how the 3 different drugs occur on each of the different population samples. You can then further break this down into male, female. And you can do the exact same thing with what you have here in terms of diet, exercise, and flavonoids. You can, just like you'd suggested, you can take the general idea and say, yep, there is no effect of, instead of drugs 1, 2, and 3, it's going to be diet, exercise, flavonoids, right, on Alzheimer's for people. But that's really broad. You may be able to do that. And again, whatever those results, if you look at the different population, or if you look at each of these different treatments, they'll give you 3 different sets of results. And then you're going to synthesize those. Again, the big thing that we're looking for here is some new way to compare that hasn't really been done before. So if you can find a bunch of studies that look at whites, and then another bunch that look at the blacks, another bunch that look at the Hispanics, and then you would be the one that would actually do a comparison and say, well, the general idea has always been that people say this drug is effective, but when we break it out, we discover that maybe that isn't exactly the case. And this is really what they did with the chocolate and tea idea. So I hope that kind of explains things a little better. I think your diet, exercise, flavonoids, that will work. With the qualifier, again, you don't necessarily give up what you did initially. Sure, maybe those things are known, but is there more that you can tease out? In other words, is there some novelty in how you do a comparison that hasn't been done before? And then you don't have to abandon all of the work that you've already done. I would hate to see you do that. So it isn't that this isn't a good idea. This is a fine idea. I just don't want to see you give up all of the work that you've already done, when it's possible that you still might be able to tease something out of that. So you're on the right track, absolutely. You can compare these things across the whole population. I just don't want you to get the same feedback you did where somebody says, oh, we already know what diet does, we already know what exercise does, we know what this does. Well, that may be, but we may not know, again, how that impacts each of these populations. So the trick is just what kind of novelty are you going to be able to bring to this. So I hope that works, and I think that's pretty well it. Again, the hypothesis is going to be your subject independent variable, which is either going to be the drugs or the diet, and then the dependent variable is its impact or its risk, whatever that may be, and how you want to define those. And again, the trick is figuring out what is the comparison that you're going to make that people haven't really done before. There may be meta-analysis out there where people have done something similar, and that's okay as long as it isn't some absolute definitive, there's a million meta-analysis that say for sure there's some result. So I hope that helps, and just let me know if not, and we can go from there.